So you were in Scotland for work or for leisure? Pleasure.
No, you don't go to Scotland for pleasure.
Oh, really? Well, that's good
At
to know.
least this time of the year is not. No, I'm an advisor to the Prime Minister there.
I see. So you were there.
So we had advisory meetings with the Education Minister and his staff.
And now you're back in Sydney. You're a professor in Sydney. So
Yes.
why Sydney?
Why not?
Because it's not even close to where you live. Don't you?
Yeah,
Don't you miss?
it's a long story, but this is the this university opened about 6 months ago a new research institute that is led by a former Minister of Education, who was a really good minister, one of the best ministers I've ever worked with. And I knew him, and I've known him for the last 8 or 9 years. And he kind of invited me to apply for this job that they created. So they created a full professorship. I'm a deputy director, research director for this new institute, and why not? Sydney is a beautiful city.
So how long is that going to be?
This is open-ended.
I see.
Yeah, and we have my family is here with me, so we have a permanent resident status here and open-ended job. So it's going to be for a while.
Good.
Until it's good.
Well, I contacted you for a couple of reasons. First of all, I had a really good chat with Andy Hargreaves, and he referred to you as an inspirational person, as someone who inspired him, and he was really grateful that you attended one of his yearly meetings. I don't know the name of the event, but he referred to you as a person who attended this meeting for beneficial reasons. I mean, not for profit.
Yeah, I think he's talking about the ARC, the Atlantic Rim.
Yeah.
Collaboratory. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
And secondly, of course, your book Finnish Lessons. And I saw your interview with John Hattie when I did some research for this interview. And many people the whole world is watching, looking to Finland. And I was interviewing John Hattie, and I always referred back to Finland. In Finland, there's more equality. In Finland, there's equity. In Finland, and then he stopped me and he said, "Timon, just stop over there. Just wait a minute." And he said, "Have you got elk envy?" And I didn't get the joke. He was making a joke. I didn't know what an elk was. But anyway, he was saying, dare to look at the successes in your own country. Why are people always looking at Finland? And, well, still it intrigues me, the Finnish platform. And still I'm hoping to see what the Dutch can learn from your system. So to start with, I know you have visited Holland. What's your view on Dutch education? Do you have experience with Dutch education?
Yes, I do have actually a number of colleagues, and the good experience collaboration I had was when my book, the first edition, was translated into Dutch. So that time, and that was I think the Dutch edition was the first foreign edition. So they were very fast there to translate it, and they wanted to have I think I came there like 3 or 4 times to do master classes with teachers and principals, and went around the country and met a lot of people, visited a lot of schools. I was teaching even in one of the schools in Rotterdam for a while, just to get an idea of the students. So I have a kind of idea of Dutch education. I know much more about the mentality of Dutch educators and teachers and school principals, certainly. But yes, I do know a little bit what's going on there.
So before, I want to talk about a couple of main topics. That's the current state of Finnish education. I'd like to talk about future skills in education, because many people talk about 21st century skills or other skills-based education. Where are we moving in the world? Where is Finland moving? What I read in your book is that you are really good at implementing, not so much inventing, but implementing.
Exactly.
when you've been to Holland, so what aspects of Dutch education are interesting for Finnish education, for example?
Yeah, let me make one comment first of all to this. Your quite correct and important notion that Finns have been very good in learning and kind of critically looking at the international cases and examples. I think that's for sure. If you compare, for example, Finland to Sweden and Norway, these other countries, particularly Norway, has been much more kind of easy to accept and adapt foreign ideas from all kinds of foreign authorities. Sometimes good, like Andy Hargreaves and others, and sometimes not so good. But Finland has never, this is not the way we are. That we invite people to come and talk to us, but it's always like, okay, thank you very much, it's interesting, but we think that we have our own way. And I think that the same applies to the Netherlands a little bit. That the Netherlands has really been a place where all the education experts, if you think that you're an international education expert, you have to have a visit to the Netherlands, invitation from there. So there's just like in a commerce, and 500 years ago, that the Netherlands was really the epicenter of merchants and business. So in the same way, the Netherlands has been a place where all these education ideas around the world really somehow meet one way or the other, and this of course creates the kind of interesting space that, from the Finnish point of view, the very interesting thing is, a question is that how can you run a system like in the Netherlands that is so diverse, that you have most of the children are in the private schools, or not in a government schools in the sense that they are in Finland, and the Netherlands school system can still have fairly high results in international surveys and studies like PISA in terms of the learning outcomes and also equity. That's a kind of, I think for the Finns, this is really the question, because in Finland, many people believe that we have an equitable education system because we are rather homogeneous and small and kind of a different nation. But then we go to the Netherlands and you see much more diversity and much less kind of a publicly governed and run system, but the equity is still strong there and learning outcomes are strong. I think that the lesson that Finns can learn is to kind of unlearn this thinking that you can have an equitable system if you have less diversity and complexity in the system, which helps Finns to think about their own system. I think the other one that goes back in the history, like more than 30 years, is the kind of a leadership culture in schools in the Netherlands. That is one of the really the leading in the world, I would say. And the Finnish school principals have been working at least the last 30 years very closely with the Dutch principals, including the principals associations and professional kind of societies that they have. And just to give you one example, that the Dutch school principals already many years ago, I think 20 years ago, created a system or developed a system called peer-assisted leadership, PAL. And so our school principals, at that time Finland didn't have anything like that. And the PAL means that you kind of you learn a lot about the leadership by shadowing a principal in a school, and then you go and study the leadership theories and other things. And this was a brand new thing for Finland. And I think that has been one critically important thing that has really elevated the leadership capacity and thinking in Finnish schools to the next level. And it's not only because of the Dutch experience, but the Dutch colleagues and the fact that there's so many people from the Netherlands have been visiting Finland, and the Finnish principals have been in Netherlands, have really kind of consolidated this thing. So I think that's if I have to mention one thing from my kind of experience, I would say that the leadership thinking that the Dutch schools have. You can see this easily if you go to if you go to ICP, the International Principals Conference, or the ESHA, the European Principals Conference. The Dutch dominance is very clear, and in a good sense. That
Yeah.
there are a lot of people there to share their thinking and practices. So leadership is really an important part of the Dutch accomplishment in education.
What I find fascinating about Finland is the fact. I mean, you're the only Finnish scholar I know who published a book about education. I've interviewed so many scholars and professors like Edie Hirsch, Fullen, Marzano, Hargreaves, and they're all from the Americas. So many great minds, and still, if you read some publications like Ravage, I'm interviewing her next month. Um, I don't understand. There's so many great minds in the United States, but still it doesn't work. And you pick the fruits from American education, and it works out for the Finnish. How come?
I don't know. Have you read my latest book called Finnish Leadership?
No. No.
You have to take a look. It's a thin little book. It's written for mostly for American educational leaders, but it has exactly this point that the whole book starts with the argument that the Finland's success, kind of a progress in education, is built on American ideas, just like you said. And I give concrete examples of the influential American thinkers and educators that have really turned around and affected Finnish school life.
Yeah, like, you for example, John Dewey and
but I'm talking about much kind of a more concrete and recent people, like for example Howard Gardner.
Yeah,
that has been really rarely mentioned, but it's a really, if you look at the teacher education, all the whole thinking of the philosophy of Finnish education since the 1970s and 80s. Certainly after 80s when Howard Gardner's Multiple Intelligences book came out. That's a kind of a foundational philosophy, really influential in a number of ways, including how the teachers are prepared. Then the other one is Bruce Joyce, that very few people actually know. Bruce Joyce he's still alive, and he created the peer coaching idea in school improvement. Peer coaching meaning that it doesn't, you can never achieve your goals in school improvement if you just train people. If you just ask teachers to come to your lectures and workshops or seminars, things will not change. That you need to have much more kind of a comprehensive way. And what Bruce created was this peer coaching idea that you need to build in the on-the-job learning, and then bring these people back to the training. It's a little bit like this Dutch idea of PAL. But Finland, we really took this seriously. Bruce Joyce came to Finland several times, and we built a whole kind of a strategy how to implement the change on this. Then the third example that I mentioned in my book is the whole school of cooperative learning. That again is something that many people have heard in the Netherlands, for example. People know the cooperative learning, but there's no other system like Finland where this cooperative learning idea was adapted as a kind of a mainstream thing to change the pedagogy in schools, and it's a 100% American influence. So what I argue here is that Finns have taken many of these good ideas. They have been able to select the good ideas from the international, mostly, as you say, American things, and then find a way how to implement that. That's why I said that there's a kind of a small little social engineer in every Finn, especially in Finnish educator, that we have this social engineering is a skill that we have, that we know how to make things work. If there's a good idea here or there in education, we have a kind of understanding how to make it work. It may be also that the Finns have more perseverance. We kind of a more grit, if you wish, that we kind of don't give up. Whereas, our sisters and brothers in Norway and Sweden don't have that in the same way, that they try certain things, and if it doesn't work, then they invite somebody else. They invite Michael Fullan to tell something more. If it doesn't work, then they invite Andy Hargreaves to tell something more. But, the Finns, we are not like that. If we believe that this is a good idea, we take it all the way to the practice.
Yeah, but why? I mean, it has been. You have to get your masters, at least since the 1970s. Hasn't there been any scholar who with brand new ideas, or someone who likes to write about education. I mean, are you the only one in Finland?
No, no, no. There are many others.
There are
But
many others.
I think that what makes this thing, and this may be a little bit different in the places like the Netherlands or or England, for example, because um, what I have, what most my colleagues in Finland do not have, is that I have this kind of outsider look also in the Finnish things. I spend so much time working in other countries, and I mostly work with my foreign non-Finnish colleagues, whereas most of my colleagues in Finland they work in Finland with their colleagues. So kind of their perspective on explaining and understanding, sharing this Finnish story to others is a very different, and they often don't see this in the same way that I do when I like the Finnish lessons that you show. It's all about telling this Finnish story in the context of international things. The global educational reform movement and all these other things.
Mm-hmm.
What makes the Finnish education different in that respect? So there are many others, but I also have privilege of being networked probably much better than most others. I work with Diane Ravitch and Linda Darling Hammond and Andy Hargreaves and Michael and all those big superstar rock stars over there, and many of them have really helped me. Like when you speak to Diane, say hello from me.
I will.
Diane has done huge favors for me for example, with that book. And without these colleagues and connections of sharing the work, and when Diane says that read this book, or this is a good thing, it's a huge boost. And most of my colleagues in Finland don't have that. They can write papers and stuff, but if you lack this kind of a community that will help you to move forward, you will never get there. Andy has been a great colleague, and
is that maybe one of the reasons that the germ never really infected Finland, because they really focused on the internal market instead of the international market?
Yeah. This is the question. I'm teaching a doctoral course here. I just was teaching my students this week, and exactly the same thing that people were asking, that why Finland has not been infected by this germ. And I said that the answer is not. It's not an easy answer to say, because there are many things. But what you say here is certainly true, that we have, that Finland has remained probably less influenced by foreign people like let's take Michael Fullan and Andy Hargreaves, for example, who are very, very famous and well known in the Netherlands. And they're also very, very well known in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, but not in Finland. The first time when Andy came with me to Finland was just about 10 years ago. And Michael Fullan came there like 7 years ago. And they both wanted to go there because they knew that it's a good thing to say to people that I have been in Finland. But before that, they both have been in Norway and Sweden in the 1990s a lot. But that's a kind of a thing that the Finns have not really been nobody was interested in Finland in the 1990s. Nobody, because people didn't know anything about what we do.
Until the Pisa surveys.
Everybody was interested in Norway and Sweden because of the money and because of the homes they and because some of the scholars they had, working around the world, but not Finland. So we were like, it's like with any infection, that if you stay healthy of Ebola or something like this, it means that you have not been attached to the people, places where this virus is spreading around. And if you get sick, it means that you have been in touch with some people who may have had the infection. So this is the other thing, and the other thing is clearly the language thing. That it's still. I remember still when I was in the university in the 1980s and 90s. The English was not the kind of people were not really comfortable of reading English texts or listening to English speakers, because German was the main. The all professors, my professors, they were all German speakers, not English. So they were reading much more the kind of a German, Central European literature and not English. So this is a new thing. This is something that changed in the 1990s and like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that now everybody is reading kind of Anglo-Saxon literature. That's one. But then I would also say that there's this kind of a little bit different mentality in general in things, and it's not only education. I mean, Finns and, for example, our Nordic neighbors is that we are much more kind of a doing people in Finland. We are much more like engineers. If you know the engineers are not interested in meetings. They're not interested in kind of theories and philosophies. They're interested in fixing the thing, and that's exactly the Finnish thinking in education as well. That we are not so don't tell me about research and theories. Let me go and fix the thing. Whereas in Sweden and Norway and Denmark, much more kind of a Central European, again Anglo-Saxon type of thing. That let's have a meeting about the problem and talk about it.
And yet, which is a bit contradictory, there's one of the successes of Finnish education is the high level of education that teachers had. I mean, they're all academics, scholars. So one of the reasons German has not infected Finland, you state in your book, is the high level of education the teachers had. So they are able to see the stories behind all the marketing stories. They know how to do the research. So in a way, it's not the whole truth, because Finnish do the research and they know how to look beyond a problem or a marketing talk, right?
Yeah, that's right. And most of our teachers are organized in the teacher association, a union, as you can read in the book. And so this union, that is a collective of professional teachers in Finland, also has
OAJ, right? You're talking about.
Yeah, it has the status like any other professional association, like lawyers and doctors. It actually belongs to the same confederation of professional associations. So, whenever there's a change coming or proposal of this or that, when teachers speak, it's a professional voice. It's not the union. It's not the union of political voice that comes through the fact that they have the same level of training as lawyers and doctors.
I was wondering, thousands of people have visited Finland and have tried to copy elements of Finnish education into their education. Do you have examples of people who were able to copy the Finnish model into their country and it has worked out in the end?
No. No, I mean that there are some interesting, good examples of the inspiration that has been used from Finland to do some good things, but then there are examples that are probably not so good. One example that's probably the biggest experiment was in the Emirates in Abu Dhabi a few years ago. Abu Dhabi wanted, because Abu Dhabi is kind of a system where there's a lot of there's a French school, an American school, a British school, everybody's there. So they wanted to have a Finnish school, and this was 8 years ago. So the idea was to really bring the Finnish education into Abu Dhabi public school system, and they created 2 schools, like Finnish Abu Dhabi Finnish schools, where half of the teachers were Finnish, pedagogy was from Finland, educational values, all those things came from Finland, except that they had to follow the curriculum that was actually from New South Wales, but adapted to the Abu Dhabi thing, and it didn't work. And that was and because it was a kind of a extreme way of thinking that we can install Finnish schools in a very strange place called Abu Dhabi, and it didn't work. But then there are good things, like in the United States, and some individual schools in the Netherlands, for example, that have been based on some of the aspects of the Finnish school. Like in America, there's a researcher who is now doing work in Texas that is a very hard land educationally, where she's trying to spread the thinking in schools that they should have scheduled just like in Finland has, that there's a 45-minute class and then 15-minute recess outdoors and play.
Mm-hmm.
then kids go back to that. Makes a lot of sense. That is like a very important part of the Finnish thing, and it's amazingly successful over there. And she's saying that she got this idea from her time that she spent in Finland. But then I must also say that most people don't really understand what the Finnish education is. Very few people understand it, because the thing is that what you see in Finland, and I think I'm clear about that in the book as well, that only about the half of the outcomes that you see coming in Finnish education are because of the education system. And then the other half is about all the other things that kids have or that they don't have outside of the school. And most people who have been writing about Finnish education or talking about it pay zero attention to these external out of school factors at all.
That's it. That's I think for me that's one of the main um, messages. That's what becomes really evident. It's a whole system. It's not just education, but it's also the environment. It's also other um, how do you say parts of the economy and politics. It's the whole picture.
Yeah,
And that's why I think it's impossible to just copy a whole system to another country. And
yeah,
sometimes it's successful. Like in the Holland, we have a concept from Sweden, Kunskapsskolan, and
yeah.
it's working pretty well, I think. So I'm curious about Finnish education nowadays and where we should go, and not just Finland, but I feel there's a shift going on to more skills-based education. But before we go there, how would you describe Finnish education today? Because this has been a few years ago. Is it still the same situation, or has it changed?
Yeah, I'm just writing the Finnish Lessons 3.0
Ah,
now. So it's going to come after the PISA results in December, maybe a year from now, or 15 months from now. It should be available. So this is exactly the question that I tackled there. Um, uh, the system is not the basic thinking is the same, because that hasn't, and that's very hard to change because it's so much planted in the culture and the way Finnish people think about the society and children and others. So that's basically, I mean, the thinking that we need to have a public system. It has to be based on comprehensive, not for kind of a selection or tracking or streaming kids. It has to be based on strong professional uh, status of teachers and principals and so on. So that's kind of a remaining thing. But I think what has happened, also the last chapter of the book is a little bit about that, and I still kind of approve, most of those things that I wrote there 5 years ago. That the big challenge in Finland has been this fact that it has been held as the best education system in the world by not only by the sorry about this, not only by the people outside of the country, but also in Finland. This was very hard for Finns to accept that we have a good education system. But now, years later, this is also the thinking in Finland, that we are the best, and we have figured out something that nobody else has done, and that has turned out to be a problem. In Singapore, they have the beautiful saying that if it's not broken, experiment. But the Finns have seemed to be thinking about this old saying that if it's not broken, don't fix it. And that's exactly been the kind of it's not the problem, but it's a kind of a slowed down many of the thinking. It's been very hard to think about how the system should change when everybody's telling you every day that you're the best in the world. So that's why, as I say in the book, that the Finnish policymakers and educators, those who are holding the power to change or lead the system, that they have been much more focused on thinking about how to explain the visitors what we have done in the past, than that they would have had time to think about really what their system should look like in the future. And that's still the problem, that there's not Finland doesn't have this kind of a clear vision of what the Finnish what the Finnish schools look like in 2030.
Well, that's
Or
what you write.
there are those ideas, but the problem is that it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to the minister or ministry people, they have their own ideas what will happen, and they talk about the digitalization and ICT, the computers and technology and artificial intelligence, all those things. And then you speak to somebody else. You go and speak to the teachers, and they speak about the strengthening the profession and making sure that the equity is in the system. So it's all over the place, and this is a big difference because the whole Finnish story is based on this common consensus in the 1980s and 90s when everybody had the same story. We knew
exactly what you say in the book is there were the two biggest drivers that I recall are, first of all, independence from Russia, and you wanted to create a really equitable school system. And in the 90s, the economic crisis. There were really strong drivers to change education. And now you have the luxury to be number one, and there is no such driver. Am I right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's a good that you brought this economic crisis in the 1990s in the picture, because we had almost a similar economic downturn in 2008 when the global crisis hit Finland. But the difference is that in the early 1990s, there was a kind of a very positive response from education, and actually. Funding for education was cut in the 1990s as well, but there was like a very positive response, kind of a message back to the schools through increased autonomy and decision-making power and freedom for schools to figure out what to do. And the difference now is that when these 2008 financial difficulties, they started to hit our school system just like 5 years ago, there has not been similar kind of a thing. There's actually been the opposite. that the money has been taken away from schools big time, really huge. Yeah. And at the same time, there has been like more things that the schools have to do more of this and more of that. And that if I compare this economic situation 5 years ago to the 1990s, they're two very different things. And that's why what you see in schools now in Finland is much more skepticism and much more frustration and much more kind of a cynicism of the what the future will be and how much these policymakers and those are really serious about when they talk about education, because at the same time they're taking so much away resources and funding from schools.
There are a couple of parties that are not really mentioned in the book, well, not really in detail. First of all, the Ministry of Education, what's their function? Secondly, the Finnish National Board of Education. These are two big parties. And OAJ, well, it's mentioned in your book, but I'm really curious about the role of these three parties.
Yeah, they're actually two. These are, I would call them two parties because the Ministry of Education and National Board of Education are basically the same. They belong to the same. National Board of Education is kind of like an executive office of the Ministry of Education. But then the third one that you didn't mention is and equally important is the Confederation of the Local Governments in Finland. That is because the schools are mostly owned and run by the local governments. So they have to be. So these three parties are the ministry and the National Board of Education as one. Then the teachers, the teacher union, and then the confederation. Yes. So those are the three, and it's absolutely critically important kind of a three-party way of leading and managing and controlling the education.
You don't talk a lot about those parties in your book. But they are really important, as you just mentioned. How come?
Well, they are important in a kind of a big picture thinking, but they're not really that important at all when it comes to what the schools look like, because it's Finland has one of the most decentralized systems of education. And if you speak to practitioners, school principals, or teachers in Finland, they practically they never speak about Ministry of Education, because Ministry of Education doesn't have anything to do with the schools. They rarely speak about National Board of Education, because it's like a bigger thing there. So if the schools and principals speak about what they do and what they can't do in a school, it's always about local government and local education authorities over there.
So
but it's not like, the Finnish system is not like in many other places, that, like here, for example, in New South Wales, where the Department of Education is everything. It's employing teachers and running the schools and giving the curriculum and all those things. But in Finland, it's not the case.
So what's the role of those departments, Finnish National Board of Education and the Ministry? Yeah. What do they do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I mentioned it in a sentence or two in a book, that the Ministry of Education has three functions. One is that they support the preparation of laws. Then they are responsible for policy, that there has to be a policy for education, research, and science. And then they are responsible for budget, the funding, although the education system is funded locally. But those are the three things. So the ministry has nothing to do with schools. It's all about working with the parliament and politicians kind of up level. Then the National Board of Education is, as I said, it's implementing these things that the ministry is doing. So they are responsible for national curriculum frameworks, core curriculum, assessing and evaluation of the education system, and particularly supporting the minority areas like minority languages or special education things or something like this. So that's a kind of a division of labor, but they are not so much involved with the lives of the schools.
So I was just Googling on teacher strikes in Finland. I was just thinking, let's see what happens. And I just read an article from a newspaper. It's called Uutiset. Mm-hmm. And it says Teachers Union says Finnish schools need 1 billion to return to Nordic standards, it says in the title. Yeah. And it says, I will read one paragraph, it says, many Finnish middle school students experience violent anxiety during school hours, says the Trade Union of Education. The organization blames lack of funding and oversized teaching groups for the problem. 6 years ago, the government subsidy for education expenses fell from 58% to 25-26%, it says. So, blah, blah, blah. Primary education funds have been cut across the country by some 520 million euros per year since 2012. So many people think Finland is the holy grail, but of course you have your own problems in Finland as well. Could you address some of these problems?
Well, you just mentioned many of those things, that and it's not only. First of all, what you read there is written because we have national elections in April. Yeah. So that's why people, the OHA and others, they bring these things quite correctly. They bring it to the attention of people. But it was already a previous government, because of the 2008 crisis really hit the Finnish economy hard. And so they did their first cuts in education. I think it was in a range of nearly 2 billion euros, mostly from secondary vocational education and higher education. But then it has continued. This current government that is now going away in April has continued these budget cuts. So that's what you read in the news is a kind of a cumulative effect of all these reductions. And it's true that about 1 billion euros has been taken away from primary and middle schools during the last few years. And I think these things, these symptoms of that you read also are exactly because of that there's much less support staff in a school. The special education programs has been kind of a streamlined. There are more special needs children in Finland now in the mainstream regular classrooms without any support and help than we had 10 years ago. So that, and this goes a little bit back to your previous question as well, with what has changed, that the whole system in terms of funding looks different now because there's so much less resources available. And the additional problem to this is that we have 310 local governments in Finland, and they are not equal. The situation in terms of these resources and funding and what they can invest in schools is a very different thing. Like Helsinki and Espoo, Vantaa, those kind of metropolitan places, when they fund 100% of their school education, do not have these similar things. That they have been affected by this, but not at all in the same way as you go to the eastern part of the country or north, where the situation is much harder. And this is particularly problematic to the Finnish school system that has been, the big part of the Finnish fame internationally is not only the high PISA results, but it's also the fact that the school system overall is very kind of even, so that these results are good throughout the system. And now because of this uneven funding and resourcing of schools, what many people are saying, including OHA and myself, is that we are going to see this kind of a equity decline soon, that we have very poor municipalities and schools where the results will most likely in this next PISA be much lower than they are in the schools where they have all these resources. And this is a new situation for Finland, because we have always held ourselves as a kind of an equitable model of equitable and fair, inclusive education.
Because money was not an issue at the time.
Yeah, that's right. It was we all the way since 1995, when we returned to the normal economic situation in terms of funding around, because of Nokia company in 1997 or 8, when the money basically came back to the schools. And then has been kind of a steady increase all the way until 2008, 9, 10. And now the funding is going down. So that's the issue.
So what's the role of OHA? They are going to raise more funding for education.
That's what they do in the elections. They want to, that's why they come out. All the unions are very active everywhere in the Netherlands and here as well.
But they're a teachers' union. Who, I mean, they don't represent a political party, do they?
No. It's a teacher union.
All right.
And it's interesting because OHA, like many other countries, you go to look at the teacher unions in England or here. It's a mostly kind of a labor or leftist, politically leftist-oriented people were there. But in Finland, it's the other way around. The OHA is a conservative. The president of the OHA is a conservative party, not a party member, but he is a right. And most of the teachers are, I would say that probably most of the teachers are in a conservative right in Finland. So it's a very different. When we have a conservative government as we have now, or center conservative government, and then we have the teacher union that doesn't have this labor or leftist kind of a flavor. The collaboration and communication is very different than if it was the other way around.
And your Minister of Education, Graan Laasonen, is she a conservative as well?
Yes.
And how's she doing? How do people see her in education? What is she doing? What is her goal, her main target, her personal goal for education?
Well, as I said, she's going out now with the rest of the Council of Ministers in April or May. Some people consider her as a good. She's a 100% politician, so that's her role. So she's very loyal to the party that is, acceptable, understandable by many ministers and politicians.
It's the second time in office, right? First, she was Minister of the Environment.
No, she was a Minister of.
That's what I read on her.
Domestic issues, maybe. No, she was not the Environment Minister, but she may have been a second minister in the Ministry of Environment. But Environment Minister she was not. But this is her second term. She has been. it's a difficult question because in Finland, I don't know how is it now in the Netherlands, but we have this minister has everything, the whole education and research. So she has higher education, research, and then school education and early childhood education and vocational education, everything.
Yeah.
So if you have such a kind of a wide portfolio, you kind of it's very hard to put the priorities in one field, because then all the others would say that how about us. So I think that she has been trying to kind of maintain this high status that Finnish education has, and I think that she has been trying to protect the funding as well, but she's not been successful. So there has been a lot of money going out while she has been in the office, and she's been kind of underwriting many of these decisions to cut the budget. But particularly secondary vocational education has been suffering a huge big time. That's probably the biggest single area that has suffered in Finland. And you should, if you have a chance to speak to some of those people, and they are furious, they're crazy, kind of a
to who? To the minister?
No, those people who are working or responsible for secondary vocational, upper secondary vocational education.
You mean principals?
Yeah, for example, because the minister has been leading those what they call a reform in vocational education. That has basically, reform has meant that students spend much more time by themselves, sometimes at home or with a computer like this, and learning. Unlike before, when they were 3 days in a college or school and 2 days in a workplace. And now the people say that because of this so-called reform of vocational education, there are a lot of kids who just hang around somewhere, have nothing to do with learning, because they don't have this kind of a contact. So this one, if you listen to the voices from higher education, there's a lot of critical views about this government, not only the minister but the whole government policy of cutting funding a lot from higher education, squeezing really Finnish universities into the kind of a tight place where they haven't been before. There was just I think last week, a program I was listening from Finland about how much the money from research and innovation has been taken away as well from universities, and that's so. Your question really depends on what aspect of education you are looking at.
I see.
Some people who work in like, if you're an early childhood person in Finland and you ask this question from him or her, you probably hear that so the minister has done good things, that she's trying to expand the access to early childhood education and preschool for more kids, and make it higher quality, so it's fine. But then if you speak to the university higher education people or vocational, you hear different stories. So she has done. I think some things good, but then there are some areas that have been very difficult.
It's a lot to comprehend. Higher education, vocational, and for the first time in the Netherlands, we have two ministers: one for higher education and one for secondary and primary education and early childhood education. It's for the first time since ever. So I've come to the last part of the interview, and that's the future of education. Not only the Finnish education, but education in general. One of the books that inspired me was Tony Wagner's The Global. I interviewed him last month, and I firmly believe that we are going to a different kind of education where skills are important, not at the expense of knowledge, but as part of the educational curriculum. So what's your view on the future? What does it look like?
Yeah, well, again, nobody knows what the future will look like. Are you thinking about the future in general, or future of schooling or Finnish education?
Well, I'm thinking of when I talk to Edie Hirsch, I have the feeling there's two major movement, and it's the knowledge movement, and he's of the knowledge movement, and the skills movement. And so there's a movement towards skills, more skills-based education, and 21st century skills are part of that movement. So I was wondering, what is the role of skills? Are we moving towards more skills-based education, or is knowledge still the number one aspects of education, and skills comes afterwards.
I think my view is that this very kind of a tension between knowledge or back to basics type of thing and skills movement will continue for the next few years. And like in many issues, I think the solution is probably a kind of a hybrid type of thing that we. I'm not fan at all about 21st century skills. As if you read my book, I never used the term 21st century skills.
Never once. No.
I don't think that it's the kind of a way to go. But partly the problem is with the language that we use and this discourse that I find problematic with this 21st century skills movement, because it's very difficult to disagree with those things that people say, that you need all this critical thinking and communication and problem solving and creativity, all those things.
It's nothing new. It's nothing new.
But that's not. These things are useless if you don't know anything. And this is where I see things a little bit differently with Tony Wagner, who is a good friend of mine. And I know that Tony has much more. He's much more speaking about the technology and Watson and Google knows everything. So now it's more about how you can use those skills. But I used to be a math and science teacher myself, and I kind of tend to think that you need to know something. And I probably see that we will have within this hybrid of skills and knowledge thing, that we will probably have a better understanding of the, some of those classical things that everybody should know and understand when it comes to not only about mathematics and science, but also the history and some of the social issues and environment and other things that there is knowledge that we need to understand. I think the challenge now is that the conversation that we are having is often based on either or type of thing, and it's rarely a kind of a good, smart way in education to say that you have to choose either this one or that one. So I think that's the way it's going to go. But my view regarding future of education is still the same as I write in a book. And I'm more I think about it, the firmer believer I am that the purpose of schooling should and will shift from what it is now, that is like, preparing young people for the next level or giving everybody the necessary knowledge and skills that they need in life. That's what most education systems, if you ask what's the purpose of education is. But as I write in my book, I think that in the future we will see much more kind of a stronger, clearer shift towards this thing that also Ken Robinson has been writing and speaking about, that everybody the purpose of education is that individuals realize what their talent, where their passion is, because this is the only way that we can kind of avoid this human resources crisis that we have now.
That's it.
In many education systems, that we kind of graduate young people from the school system who have kind of lost their passion and interest to develop themselves, and that's what I'm seeing. That if we can help everybody to find the passion that they have within them, that's the number one purpose of schooling. I don't care whether this happens through teaching knowledge and emphasizing that, or developing skills. That's not the relevant question. I think the important question is that what should the school system look like that would be enabling more young people to realize what they are good at.
I think that's the only constant that we have influence on, yourself and being yourself. And it reminds me of the book 20 Lessons for the 21st Century Skills by Harari. He says only one lesson, the most important lesson is know thyself. And you refer to the 21st skills movement, and I've interviewed last month. I talked to Charles Fadell, and he wrote the book 21st Century Skills. And a couple of months before that, I talked to David Ross he was the president of P21. And what I find, what strikes me most is that those people always say it's a combination of the two, knowledge and skills. And these people who really are specialized in 21st century skills, they always say it's a combination of these skills. Yeah. So they don't claim that it's only skills, and that's the greatest lesson.
Yeah,
So
but as I said earlier, that and it may be just like you said, but it's a problem with the communication. As soon as you call it,
yeah,
if you call it the 21st century skills, or as OECD is calling it, their skills. They don't have an education strategy; they have a skills strategy.
yeah,
If the education ministries are converted into departments of skills
yeah,
and labor that deal with education. Of course, most people think about it like, so knowledge is not important anymore because it's all about skills. Even if Charles and others say, just like I said, it's a hybrid, it's a combination of these two things. But if you speak about, so why not speak about 21st century knowledge and skills then?
Well, Charles said, well, 21st century skills are outdated. We have the four-dimensional model right now. So he corrected himself.
Yeah.
So my last question is about how do you pay attention to the self-awareness in students in Finland? How do Finnish students figure out who they are in education, and how are they supplied with tools?
This is something that begins already in the very early years, and probably one of the strongest elements of our school system is the early childhood education before children even come to school, because that's all we do there. That it's these 3 or 4 years that most children spend since they are 2 or 3 years old before the school, they are systematically guided and helped to learn how to take responsibility of their own things, learn how to realize who they are, learn to respect and dignify other people, rather than what's happening here, for example, in Australia. It's all about preparing kids for literacy and numeracy since they are 2 years old, and everything is guided, everything they're handheld to all these places, and the helicopter parents are making sure that nothing bad happens to the kids. And the Finnish early childhood is a very different space. And so that's why I say that, if I have to identify kind of a strongest element of Finnish system, why we are doing things differently and sometimes better than others, is the early years education. That's a beautiful piece of, children's lives when they can freely kind of express themselves, and in most early childhood settings. And that's where they learn this kind of self-actualization and realization that, we are different. The other one is that because this is a public service in Finland, it means that since the age of 2 years old, these kids in Finland, they are exposed and kept in a group of very socially mixed kids. And that's absolutely critical thing for your kind of realizing who you are, understanding that there are different people around you, still learning this equality thing, that we are different but we are equal, particularly right now in places like the Netherlands or England or America, or certainly here in Australia, where the social segregation of children starts at the age of 1. When here, for example, if you go to the daycare, we have 2 boys, 3 years and 6. So the younger one is right now, as we speak, he's in a daycare that costs a huge amount of money, $160-$170 a day.
Well,
that we pay, and that's that's a social. He spends a day with the kids whose parents are like me. We have money, we can afford it. We are both working. We are all educated. So these kids never see in their lives Aboriginal kids, or they don't see children from the unemployed parents, or lowly educated single mothers. They don't know anything about those kids. But in Finland, what I'm saying here is that we kind of raise these children in this diversity, this little diversity that we have in our society. But there's a huge amount of diversity in every early childhood education place. And as soon as they go to school when they're 7, they have already a masses of experience that have kind of help them to take responsibility, understand that they are individuals and respect others, and understand, how to deal and cope with other people. Hugely important thing. And in many other countries, these things only begin at a certain time of when kids are already in the school, if they ever start.
yeah.
And that's why the Finnish kids are. Do you know what I mean? That the Finnish kids are much ahead of many others already at the age of 6 or 7 when they go to school.
I have two short questions. The first one is who or what inspires you today? Which persons, which scholars? It can be outside of education as well. I always ask my interviewees, who should I interview next if if you had to recommend someone. So think of persons who really inspire you.
Yeah. Well, many of these people, many of the names that has been mentioned during this conversation have been and continue to be my inspirations, like Ken and Diane and Andy and many others. But if you ask me, like right now, at this very moment, there's one person you must have heard about, the Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, the 17 or 16-year-old.
16 years old.
Yeah.
She's a kind of a person that is really giving me hope. She says that we don't need hope, we need action and change. But she's giving me hope, not only because of the climate things, but because of the change that she is showing can come through young people. And she's saying that you're never too small to make a difference. And that's why I think that she's a very powerful and good reminder of those things, that we can change things, but it requires we have to stop talking and start acting, just like she does. I think she's a wonderful example in this way. Yes. So she is at the moment she's my inspiration.
It's like a global reform movement, because many countries are following her example right now. And if I had, who would you recommend for me to interview next if you had to pick someone?
I think that outside of this list of obvious usual suspects that you probably have a long list of people to talk to, I would probably go and talk to somebody who nobody else would probably interview, but you can do that. And that's my good friend and colleague, who is a city mayor of Reykjavik, Iceland. And because he's a medical doctor, he's a second-term mayor now. I'm his advisor there, and they're doing wonderful things in education. It's just amazing. But not only education, but Iceland has been able to do what no other country has been able to do, and pull their young people away from alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, and bad habits, where they have probably the healthiest generation of young people right now in Iceland, in Reykjavik. But he's also a leader, a fearless leader in the school reform and educational change in Reykjavik, try to change the whole country through the city. But because he's a medical doctor, his views are different. But I think this Iceland story is something that deserves to be shared with everybody else. Nobody knows anything about education in Iceland, and it's for me. People often ask me that what is the most inspiring place in terms of education. I always say Iceland, because their school system is fantastic. According to if you just look at the OECD PISA statistics, your conclusion is that it's probably the most failing system in the world, but it's not. If you go there, I spend a lot of time there in the schools, and it's a beautiful, wonderful place what they do. It's really a kind of the El Dorado of childhood.
What's his name again?
I can send you his. Icelanders have very funny names. His first name is Dagur, but I'll send Eckerston, something like this. I'll send his name and email if you want to write
it would be great, because if you want to change education, that's what I've learned. It's best to not only look at education itself, but the whole system. So that would be nice. Yeah. So if you would be so kind to send me a photo of you, which I can use in my article as well, I would be helped a lot, because I.
Do you do your things in Dutch or in English?
In Dutch.
Dutch. Okay, very good. Yeah, I'm very happy to share if you have links to these previous things. The previous people you have interviewed and others, I'm happy to share. I have a lot of followers in Netherlands, my social media.
Yeah, all right, I will. So if you could send me a photo of you, which I can use in my article, so I'm not violating any copyright. My last question is about, well, no, not this book. I have many books in here. The very last one, and it's going to be a difficult one. You have a niece, and she's called Vera. and
Yeah.
you always mention her in every talk. I've listened to many talks because always when I do the dishes, I listen to one of your talks to prepare for the interview. And you
Good.
always tell her story and that she didn't pass the examination the first time. And I always wondered, what did she say the second time? And I think it's in the book because her, her motivation, it doesn't say that it's what she said when she did the examination for the second time, but it was
Yeah.
really, her letter really touched me, and it really was from the heart.
Yeah.
But I don't want to talk, huh?
Do you want to hear what she said?
Yeah, I was curious about what she said, but my question is really this. Let's say that you are in front of the commission, and the question is for you, for Mr. Sahlberg. Why do you want to become a teacher? What would be your answer?
I would probably speak because I spoke about this with my niece when afterwards when I was writing a book and when she told me the story, and I would say something like that my moral mission in life that I carry within me is to make the world a better place. That when I pass away, I want to do everything to make this world a better place for my children and their grandchildren. And then, of course, the question is that how can I do that? And I could do, I could go and work in a medicine. I could be a medical doctor and heal one patient at a time, or I could be a lawyer and try to do more justice and correct things and make sure that the good things win and bad things lose. Or I could be in arts and try to provide good things for people to enjoy. But of all of these things that I could consider, if I really want to make a world a better place, teaching with your children is probably the most powerful thing to do, and I can make the most difference in people's lives by teaching them things, working with them in a school. And this was the answer that my niece said also, that she feels that she wants to help people, to young people to be who they are and do better, and that she feel because she could have been anything. She was thinking about medicine and other things, but I want to be a teacher because that's the best way for me to change the world. And my answer would be the same. That I think that in a classroom and working in a school, I can I can affect tens of thousands of people, and that's why I want to be a teacher.
And she's still a teacher, I hope.
Yeah, and she's still the nice thing is that she's committed to be a special ed teacher, not just any teacher, but she wants to work with the hardest of the hardest children in a school, those who have very, very hard way to go. And exactly the same reason, I went to see when Diane was in Finland, Diane Ravitch.
Yeah,
I took Diane to see her school, where she was working in a group of 8 kids and a very difficult thing. And she said, these are the kids that I want to help. I want to change them. I want to give them a kind of a chance in life. And it's a beautiful realization when you see something like this. And when you do that with the young people, not in a courtroom or operation room, when you try to, help young people to find a way and control their own lives, that's the thing, that's the beauty. And that this is what she's doing, and she will continue this until, hopefully, until the very end.
You passed the test, Mr. Sahlberg.
Thank you. When does the program begin?
Thanks a lot for your time and your inspiration and your patience.
Yeah. Thanks for your interest. Great questions and good conversation. And I'll send you Dakul's email, so if you at some point want to write to him, say hello from me, and you can tell him that he is my hero, one of my heroes.
All right, that's great. That's
as a leader,
a good start. So I will, if you could send me his email and a photo of you. I will need a couple of weeks for the article because I have Diane Ravitch and Larry Cuban and Carol Dweck to interview the next few weeks. So I'm kind of busy, but I will send you a link to the Dutch. It's going to be in Dutch, but Google Translate does a great job nowadays.
So, okay, good. Very nice. Yeah, and I have some Dutch students from the Netherlands here as well. So
thanks for your time and have a nice day.
Yeah, you too. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye. Thanks.